Good morning. I won't say it loud because it's early, right? Second day. Probably feel a little bit like this. Did you have a good time yesterday? Yeah? Yesterday evening also with the party, with the magic and stuff? Drank a little bit too much? I'm sorry, this is not going to be a talk that you're going to relax. I'm showing a lot of code. I'm sorry. This is how I'm mentioned in the schedule. It has a nice twist because it looks a little bit like Ukrainian or Russian, but this is my name. They made a little mistake, but if I have to write it down in Ukrainian or Russian, I probably make a lot of mistakes. So this is my name. I saw the picture outside yesterday, and I put my flag on it, the red one. And later that evening, I saw 3 more flags, and I think you're in the audience there, right? 3 fellow Dutchmen. Good to see you here. Last year I was in Odessa. I also met Dutch people there, so we love you, Ukraine. So, me, I do a lot of stuff. I'm born and raised in Gouda, in the Netherlands. You might know it from cheese. I'm a freelance web and app developer, done that, been on the web since 1996. Yes, I'm that old, sorry. That's why I'm a senior engineer at the largest Dutch insurance company. I'm also the lead developer of our pension app, and that's an app built with native script. I did a talk in Odessa about that, where you can build native apps with web technologies. As I said, you can follow me on Twitter on my name, but I know Twitter isn't that big here, so you can also email me if you have any questions. And I really love superhero movies, definitely. I take my girlfriend also to them. She kind of enjoys them, but she does it for me. And she said, well, you know, you look like 4 more and more every day. Until I realized it was after Avengers Endgame. I don't know if you remember that, but 4 was not that super anymore. All right. All things aside, let's talk about PWA. Progressive Web Apps, or web app. Who knows about PWAs? Good. Who's done something with it? That's less, okay. Who regretted it? Oh, okay, that's good. Well, I'm here to tell you about the fundamentals. Just start from the beginning so you have a good understanding of how progressive web apps work. But the thing is, they need to be reliable. They should always load and never show the dinosaur like in Chrome, if you're offline. We want them to have fast in a way that they respond to user interactions right away. And they should be engaging. That means they should feel like a native app, even if they're not a native app. Let me take you through key features of PWAs. They are linkable, like URLs. It's still a website. Remember that. It's not a native app, it's still a website. They're safe. They only work if you're running on HTTPS. You have to have a certificate, an SSL certificate on your website. And you should anyway these days. They are discoverable. It's just a website, so they can be found through Google or whatever other search engine. They should be responsive. Well, we've known it for quite a few years now. Screen resolutions are from very small to very big, so we already built stuff like this. They feel like a native app. That's not particularly necessary, but usually they are. The look and feel part of that. They should be fast loading, nevertheless. And I'll show you how we can do that later on. And they're always up to date. You don't have to go to the App Store to get a new version. This morning I saw I have 20 updates on native apps. The hotel Wi-Fi is good, fortunately, so just hit update. But if you have a website, it's always up to date because you go to the server itself. They are installable. That means you can have a link to it on your home screen. And we cache data to make it more fast. And they should be re-engageable. That means the home screen, you can see it, you can use it immediately, and you can use push notifications just like in native apps. I must say, push notifications, I'm not a big fan of it, because if you have some mediocre website that's not interesting for everybody, you don't need to send push notifications all the time. For instance, if you have a weather website, it might be helpful to send weather alerts, for instance. So be very careful about it. I see pictures being taken, fine, great, but I make sure the slides are available afterwards also. There's a link on the last slide, and also a slide to demo code. So if you want to make the most important picture, make it of the last slide. And they are also connectivity independent. They can work offline, and I'm going to show you why and how. If I look at this website, you probably know it. I've loaded this website, and then I went to Google Developer Tools and said, well, I'm going to be offline now. And what happens if I reload it? There is no internet, but we can play. It's fun for a minute, and then it's like, oh, game over. This is not the experience you want to share to your users. I must say, progressive web apps love modern browsers. I'm sorry. Who needs to support Internet Explorer still? I feel you. I have to do the same. I feel you. Does PWA work on Internet Explorer? Nope. But the good thing is, it's still a website. Progressive web apps are a progressive enhancement. So your website is not depending on it, but it's an extra for, say, modern users. But it will not break. Okay, let's look at some starter code, just to begin with. Pretty simple, it's just an index file with a link to a CSS, and I have an image and an H1 there. I have some CSS to make it look pretty. I'm not a designer, so don't judge me. And in the end, it looks like this. Whoa. Great, right? Okay. One of the things with PWAs are manifest files. So what is a manifest file? Essentially, it's just a JSON file. And a JSON file informs the browser about your web application, and also tells it how to behave when it's installed on your device. And this is a basic version, say the minimum version of how it should look. You have a name that's shown, for instance, on the splash screen that's generated when you install it, a short name that is beneath the icon on the home screen. You can set a language, a starter URL. In this case, it's just the root of the application. What you could do here is have some analytics connected to it. So I have an UTM source or something like that. So your analytics software knows that somebody starts this PWA. You have the scope. In this case, the dot means all of it. You could also use a subdirectory, for instance, a subfolder. And I here have display standalone. And this is imitates a native app. So it means it has the whole screen, but still you have on top the line with the Wi-Fi connection and the date and time. You could also use, for instance, browser, but that means you see the website in a browser like you would do in a browser. So that defeats the point of having a native app like. I've set the orientation here to portrait. That means if you tilt the device, it's still in portrait mode. And you can set a background color and a theme color that's used when it's installed. And you set icons. It's still empty here. I'll come back to that. The next thing you do is, like a style sheet, you link to it. That's all. And let's see what happens. We reload. And then you see, if you go to the Google Developer Tools, to Application and Manifest, you'll see some information there, the name, the short name, theme colors and stuff like that, but you also see some warnings. Particularly the one, manifest does not contain a suitable icon. So let's work on that. You don't want to make those icons all by yourself, by hand. Also because you want to generate specific iOS icons to have it pretty, and iOS can be pretty daunting with a lot of different sizes. So for this you can use the PWA asset generator. And let's see how that works. I've made a script that says npm run generate, and that will run the PWA asset generator, uses an SVG to create the icons, and it also will update my index.html and my manifest file. And if we're patient a little bit, then it will spit out a lot of files, and here it comes. You don't want to do this by hand, definitely not. And more, even more. There you go. So if we go to the manifest JSON, you see that 2 icons are added there now. And if you go to the index.html, we see a lot of Apple Touch icons there. You don't want to do that all by yourself. And if you see, there are many files created, and also 2 files are updated there. For demo's sake, I removed all the Apple icons because it's too much to see in the code. So this is what you saw. It is changed, the icons are added. And if we go back to the PWA and we reload it, you can see icons are now there. It's a white background, so I changed the theme to dark, just to show you that they're not transparent, they're still white. Okay, that's part 1. Let's go to H2HS. Any ideas what that means? Add to home screen. Acronyms, right? And it means add a link on your home screen, an icon like a native app. There are a few criteria you have to adhere to. It shouldn't be installed already, because it doesn't make sense to install it again. It should be served over HTTPS. Well, we already said it should. You have to have a web app manifest. Well, we just created one, right? And that manifest should include a short name or a name, a starter URL, and the display must be one of full screen standalone of minimal UI. So if it's browser, as I mentioned, it's not going to install. You must have at least these 2 icons. You already saw, we had them. And there's also in the manifest file, you can have related applications. So you can refer to a native app in your code, and it will show the banner on top in your mobile device. If you have prefer related applications to true, then it will not install either, because you prefer the native app. But if you have a native app and then you want to install PWA, are you doing the same things? Maybe you should choose. And for Chrome, there's an extra thing. You need to have a registered service worker with a fetch event handler. If you don't know what it is, no problem. I'll get back to that. This is on an Android device, and you can go to the kebab menu there, and you can do it by yourself. Go to Add Home Screen. You get this dialog saying, well, do you want to add it? Yes, I want. And there you can see it's on the home screen. In this case, the squared image is just rounded by the operating system itself. And if you start it, you get a splash screen. You don't have to do anything for that. And in the end, there is your application running. And it doesn't look like a browser. It doesn't look like a website anymore. And if you want to switch programs, you can see it now has also the icon on top and not a browser icon on top there. If you go to Firefox on Android, even when you start up your page, it already informs you how to add it to your home screen. And if you do it, you get this pop-up. But that's all manual. And you don't want to tell your users. I've seen it on websites like, go there, click that, do this, and then it's to your home screen. You want to have it in a different way, a user-friendly way. So we have an event called before install prompt. Remember this, but this is from Chrome. That will hit you in the face immediately. You don't want to do that, because this might scare people off. What's this? It will appear quite soon. You have to interact a little bit with the website, but it will appear quite soon, and people don't know what it is. So wouldn't it be more nice to have a menu option or a button that will only be available when it's appropriate? So in HTML, I added a button to add it to the home screen. Sorry. With some CSS, and I created an JavaScript file called h2hs. And what we're doing here, we listen to the before install prompt, and if it's fired, then we prevent it from showing. That's the event.prevent default. Then we use that event to hook up to our own variable called deferred prompt. And because this happened, we can now show that button on the screen with the class list.addShow. Next, we want to listen to a click on that button. If people click on the button, then we want to show that prompt. So that's what's happening here. We have an add event listener on the click, and if we have a deferred prompt, so if we still have that information, then we will show the native dialog and listen to the user's choice. It can be dismissed, or it can be that they accepted it. You can also make sure that I just console logged it out here. You can also send an event to your analytics software, of course, so you know whether people did or did not install it. And after that, we want to remove the button. So let's see how that works. You can see that the before install prompt is fired and the banner is not shown, but we show our own banner and we get the option and we say install. Cool. This is in a desktop browser. Did you see that? This is not on a mobile device. This is on my Mac. And what's cool about that is that it can also install on your Mac. So if I go to my Launchpad, you can see I now have PWA superheroes there. And if I start it, I get the application. Who needs Electron, right? You can do this with a progressive web app also. All right, let's talk about service workers, and I think they're really the kings of PWA. A service worker is a JavaScript file, simple as that. And the thing is, it runs in the background, so it doesn't interfere or mingle with your website. It's because it's in a separate thread. It's non-blocking. It is scoped to your website, though. It's not like you can control everything. It's still bound to your website, but it doesn't interfere with it. And also because it can't interfere, it's because it doesn't have access to the DOM, to the document object model. So it cannot modify anything for you. It's asynchronous. It uses promises, or you can use async await. And it's event-driven. You already saw the before install prompt, for instance, but there are more events. You can think of it like a man in the middle. Do you know what a man in the middle attack is? Yes, no, yes. Who is on the Wi-Fi of this venue now? Okay. Are you running a VPN? No. Then you're possibly can be a victim of man in the middle, because what it does, it intercepts your connection from your browser to for instance, the website. So you don't want to have a man in the middle in this way. But the thing is, with PWAs, it acts like a man in the middle, but it's like unicorns. It's more like Marvel in the middle. It is possible for it to intercept your connection to the server in a good way. So let's look at the service worker file. In this case, I have two events here. I listen to the install, and I listen to the activate. Install is like, there's a service worker available for you, and then it will make sure it runs. And in the app.js file that we have, we need to check for a modern browser. Remember IE? It will break if we don't check for if service worker in Navigator. If we're there, we can register that JavaScript file, the service worker file, and we get a promise back saying, well, okay, it's registered. Cool. I include this app.js file in our HTML to get it running. I don't need to include the service worker file because that's called by the app.js. And let's see what happens. It now says there are no matching service worker. So if we reload, it now says something different. Page does not work offline. Okay, we can work on that, but it has a service worker now. That's cool. If we want to have it working offline, we need to use the cache API. Okay. If we're running it now, you can see it's all coming from the web. But we want to cache it. The first thing is we can cache static files that we know will be on that page, like the logo or the CSS we're using, the index file, and all the images that we use. So that's what we're doing here. In the install event, we wait until we open a cache. In this case, we call it static, and we will add all these files to it. We can do it a little bit prettier, like this. We have an array of files we call static files, and we open and we have a cache name file, in this case static-v1, and we open that one and add all the files in one go. It's a good thing to number or to version your service worker. So in this case, static v1. This will update more and more. So if we do that and we run it, you see there's a new service worker there. And now I have a static cache with all the files mentioned. But we're not using it yet. And one thing we need to do to get this working is to activate it by hand. And that's either we can do it in the DevTools saying activate this service worker, or the user has to close the browser tab or the browser itself and restart it. That's not really good, so we'll come back later if I have time enough. Yeah, I couldn't find a Deadpool image, but I had to use a dog, right? For the fetch API, let's fetch some data now from that cache. All right. You can see if we run it, it still doesn't fetch anything. So there's an event called fetch. And in this event, we will look at all the caches, and we'll match on the key. And the key is the request. That's like /index.html or /image or whatever. And if it's found, we can return it immediately with the return response. Otherwise, we're still going to fetch it from the internet. So first we look in the cache, and then we go to the internet. Let's see how that works. So again, I have a new service worker. I have to skip waiting to make it active again. I clear this out. And let's refresh. And now you can see in the size, it doesn't say size, it says service worker. That means everything is retrieved from the cache, nothing from the network anymore. This means speed, right? Thank you, Google Translate. That's what we want. We want speed. Remember this one. This was without fetching it from the cache. And that took 145 milliseconds from my local machine, because I'm running on localhost here. That's pretty fast. But with the service worker, it's even faster. It's 59 milliseconds. Remember what that can do for your website if you're running on a flaky Wi-Fi connection, for instance, in a hotel or in the Netherlands in a train. So that makes a really, really big difference. But there's one thing. We create caches, and if we change things, if we change the version numbers of our caches, we end up with multiple caches. And you can see in the previous example that it will look at any file in any cache. So you don't know if it's the new one or it's still the old one. So what we want to do is we have to clean it up to make sure the user always has the latest one. So for this reason, I created an about page, and I just put a link in the index.html for it. This is the about page. It's like, okay, this is a demo site. Nothing more, nothing less. Some styling. And here you can see I don't put the about HTML into the static files, but I changed the index.html file. So for that reason, I want to make sure that my cache is updated. So I give it version 2 in this case. And let's see what happens if we run this. We now have a static v1 and a static v2. If we would load the page now, we have no idea what version of index.html will be shown. Will it be with a link to the about, or will it be the old one without it? So let's clean it up. What we can do if a service worker is activated, we can go through the caches one by one and then go through the keys of it. And if we find a cache that doesn't have the latest version, so the name of static cache, we just delete it. So in this case, we have v2, that's the one we want to use. v1 will be removed. Okay, let's go dynamic. Because it would be nice to have a website just only with a few files, but you will get more and more files, of course, and you don't want to store them all in the static cache. So let's introduce a dynamic cache. And you can see I forgot to include the add to home screen.js file, so I just made sure I do it here also and bump the version there. What it does, if it's not in there, if it's not in the cache, it will fetch from the internet. We can change that and say, well, if it's not there, we will fetch it, and after we fetch it, we will open a new cache, or open an existing cache, called dynamic cache in this case, and put that result of that fetch in there. Be sure to use .clone here, because you can only use that response from the server once. So if you use it and put it in the cache, you cannot serve it anymore to the website itself. So that's why we have to clone it here. And we had this piece of cleanup. Let's make sure we also clean up the dynamic cache. So we have a static cache. We have a static v3 we're getting now. I skip the waiting again, and then I will reload, or go to the About page. And you see the About page, and you also see that we have a static with, yes, add to home screen, but also we now have a dynamic cache which holds the About page. And this is, if we would reload it now, it would not go to the internet again, it would just serve it from the cache. So more speed. But what if we are offline? What if we are temporarily offline because the Wi-Fi drops or whatever? Okay, let's look at this. Sorry. If you're now offline, and I go to the About page, it says it's not available. This is before the dynamic cache. We just started the page, we haven't been to that page yet. We go offline and we try to load it, and it's not there. That's not a real good experience, right? It's like the dinosaur. So let's create an offline page. We're just saying, well, sorry, it hasn't been cached yet. Why don't you try any of the other pages? It's what we offer now. So what we do is we include the offline to the static cache because we always want that available. And in this part, the top part stays the same, but we will have a catch there if something goes wrong. And if something goes wrong, we go to the static cache, open that, and return the offline HTML file. But what if we are missing a CSS file or a JavaScript file or an image? We don't want to return offline HTML for that. So let's check whether the file we're requesting is indeed an HTML file. Only then we will return the offline page. So how does that work? We skip waiting again. You see there is now also offline.html in our static cache. We go offline, and the About page is not in our cache yet, but we show the offline page. Well, that's better than just showing, well, sorry, you're offline, we cannot serve you anything, right? Okay. Let's talk about application shell, because if you look at Facebook, for instance, if you load the native app and you're not online, you get this. Or if you have a slow connection, you first get this and it will be filled in later. This seems like something is going on, right? But essentially it's not just showing things that doesn't do anything, but it gives you the perceived feeling of speed. So we can do that in our PWA also. In the index.html, I place some containers with placeholders in that. That's just this code. I have some CSS to make it fancy. I'm not a designer, as I said, but it has a little animation in it that changes the color. Again, I have to update my version number to make sure that I get the latest files. And if I run this, again, we have to hit skip waiting. That's really annoying if you're developing PWAs. And here, if I load it now, you can see something is happening there. It might load something real soon. You get that feeling of speed. And we want to fill that with dynamic data. So dynamic data from an API, for instance. In this case, I use the superheroapi.com, of course. And I just get one item here for this demo sake. So what I do is I fetch this, I get the JSON of it, and I have a function called update UI. And that update UI isn't pretty, but it serves its purpose now. It just sets things in the inner HTML. It gets the name, the height and width, height and weight, and an image. I use this API.js file. I want to run it, but I don't want to run it immediately. I want to make sure everything is loaded and run this data at the end. So I use the keyword defer here. That means if everything is loaded, then this script will run. Again, bump my version number and make sure that API.js is in the static, because we want to use it all the time here. And how does that look? A new service worker. Let's keep waiting. You see I have a static version 6 now. And if I reload it again, then you saw that skeleton a bit, and then it loads this data. And you can see that the picture is now there in my dynamic cache, but also the JSON file that I retrieved. And that's not a good solution to have that in your dynamic cache. There's something else for that. It's called IndexedDB. That's especially for storing, for instance, JSON files. So it's a little bit tricky, but let's deep dive in it. You're still with me on this Saturday morning? Yeah, okay. You can review the code later on, so no worries. What is IndexedDB? Well, I found this definition, so I want to use this one. It's an asynchronous transactional key value database in the browser for data that changes frequently, is typically in JSON format. Okay. It's transactional, and that means if you want to write something to your database or clear something or update something, it will make sure that if something fails, everything will be rolled back to the initial version. And that's good, because you don't want to mess up your database. I had that slide twice. The thing is, IndexedDB is not that very nice to work with. It's a little bit weird. But unfortunately, Jake Archibald from Google made IDB plugin for it. And it makes it easier to use IndexedDB. And it also gives you promises, because IndexedDB itself works with callbacks. And you probably all have been in callback hell before. So this is a way better way to work with it. We download the IDB.js file. I must say now things have changed in this plugin because it works, it's now tailored for Webpack or Rollup and stuff like that. But I still have an old version of the JavaScript file, and for this demo, it's better to use that JavaScript file than set up Webpack, because Webpack. And I also create a utils file which will do stuff with that IndexedDB. In my service worker, I also want to use that IDBS JSON JavaScript file and that utils file. And it works a little bit different. In a service worker, you import scripts. In this way, you have access to those JavaScript files. Bump the version, and also have it in my static files. If you look at the utils.js file, I have to have a database name, so I call it dynamic. It also needs to have a version. And mind you, it cost me 2 hours to figure out why things weren't working. The version needs to be a number, an integer, not a string. I used v1, and then you're screwed up 2 hours of your life. And you also have, in that database, you have a store. And the store, you can see a store like a table. In this case, I call it heroes. I include that URL again, call it API URL. And what I do here is now I open the database, and if it's opened, I check whether the store is already there, the heroes store in this case, and if it's not there, I create it. And I also set the primary key there on ID, what I get from the JSON file. Next to it, I have a write data function. And essentially what that does is that it opens a store and it will put data in it that I provide. Simple as that. I have a clear all data because in this case, when I want to add something to the database, I just want to clear everything first to have a clean start. You probably don't want to do that in production data, but for this demo, it's a good way. We set it to the transaction to read-write, and then we have a store.clear. And we also want to read some data that we save there. So we set the transaction here to read only, and we said, get all. Give me all the stuff that's in the database. Okay, service worker. We need to change that too, because otherwise it will look at the static cache or the dynamic cache, and we want to look at the IndexedDB. So when the request is from that URL, we clear all the data from the dynamic database store, and we will return the JSON file we get from the service, but we also write it to the store. And in the else, we still keep the other things for the static and the dynamic part. We changed the API.js a little bit, because I also now introduce network data received. We gonna fetch it from the internet and also fetch it from the cache. And if the internet is faster, we don't want to show the stuff from the cache anymore. So that's why we're doing this. I said read all data from that store, get the data, and update my UI with the JSON file from the store. How does that look? Again, skip waiting. Okay, you see an old cache is clear there. And if I run it, you see retrieve from cache is undefined. It's not in the cache yet. It's retrieved from the web. The UI is updated by the web, and we wrote that data to the cache. So if you go to IndexedDB, we have heroes here, and hey, there's the JSON file. That's good. So if we reload it again, you can see it now retrieves from the cache. It updates the UI with the data from the cache. It again gets it from the internet and updates it from the internet again because it might be fresher than what's in your cache. And again, it writes to the cache to save it for the next version. Anybody heard of Workbox? Okay. All that I told you now, up until now, Workbox has an easier solution for it. Sorry, but I wanted to show you the basics first to understand things that happen. But Workbox from Google is a great tool. I haven't used it myself, but it has a lot of things for you out of the box. Some things about the future or things that are happening now. There's also something called background sync API. And what that does is it defers actions. So, for instance, sending a message to a database, or sending a message to a server until the user has a good internet connection again. It saves it in the IndexedDB. And it works like, say, the outbox of Gmail or your mail client or something. If you're not online, it will stay there, and if you go online, it will then send it. As I said, it's queued in an outbox. But do make sure that you notify your user when you're doing that. If there's not a good internet connection and you save it to IndexedDB to send later, maybe display a little image saying, well, we queued your message, we cannot send it yet. And if it's being sent, you can hook into that event and say, well, we sent your message, thank you. Support is okay-ish. It's Android mostly. So use it with care. And another thing that's really magic is the periodic sync API. And what does that do? Well, it just syncs data on a regular basis. You can say, wait for a minimum of 1 hour, and around that hour, it will sync data to your app and update it. While users are sleeping, for instance, like that's what native apps can do too. One thing we need to be sure of as web developers is that we don't drain the batteries of our users or give them hefty bills on their mobile subscriptions. In Ukraine, I bought a package from my provider, say I can use 1 gigabyte for an amount of money. If we keep on updating it, then I might run out of that gigabyte, right? So you can, for now, you can set the power state to auto or avoid draining. That are parameters you set. And this is a good one, avoid cellular, that if a user is on 2G, 3G, 4G, whatever, don't sync. Only sync it when it's on Wi-Fi, for instance. This should be out of the box, I think, but it's still in development because it's experimental still. And if you look at, can I use it? Well, you can use it in Chrome Canary with some flags and stuff like that, but it's not production ready yet, and it probably will change. Okay, I have a few minutes left, and I want to tell you about the new version available stuff, and you don't have to close the browser or skip waiting. Let's say we add a div called snack bar in the page and say, well, there's a new version available. And with some CSS, we first hide it, and if it gets the class show, we will make it visible and make it pretty. So in the service worker, we can listen to messages from our application. And in this case, we add an event listener to message. We listen to message. And if we send in that message an event that has action skip waiting, then we trigger the self.skipWaiting. That means what I did manually every time, it will be done automatically for you. In our app.js, we have a variable called new worker that will get that new worker file. We have the show update bar function that just shows it when we need it. And we have a click event on that bar to send that message to a service worker, the skip waiting part. Now it gets a little bit more tricky. We listen to, in the app.js, when we have registered the service worker, we listen to an event called update found. And when it's found, we will listen to a state change because we only want to act when it's installed. And when it's installed, we will show that show update bar. And the next thing is, if a user hits that bar, we have to listen to the controller change event. And if we get that, then we can say, okay, reload the page, because then it's in the service worker already activated itself. How does that look? Whoop, yeah, there's a new version. Click here to update, and you see it skip waiting there, and now it's gone. User doesn't have to close the browser, just has to hit, there's a new version, please update it. And with that, I would say thank you very much. Yes, take pictures of this slide, because on the top there's a link to my profile which has all these slides. And below that there is the GitHub repository with all this information divided in, I think, 10 different branches, so you can see how we move on in time. And if you like stickers, I have stickers, PWA logo. Yeah, you like stickers. They are here on the stage, but I also make sure that there will be at the other part of the venue too. So thank you again.
Okay, so now any questions?
We have some time.
Yeah, that first was here.
Not too difficult, please.
Okay, so thank you for a great speech and nice pictures with Deadpool. That was nice. I have two questions. First question is, what about push notifications with PWA?
You can definitely use it. I didn't include it in this talk because it takes, well, it's talk on its own, but it takes quite some time to do that. But it's there. You can use the service worker to listen to push notifications and show it. What you need to do from the application itself is register to a server that can send push notifications. You can build it yourself, or you can use some commercial versions of that.
Okay, and the second question, you had a slide, key features of PWA, and you have a point responsive. What does it mean?
Responsive mean that it adheres to every screen format. So if you, just like a normal website, if it looks nice on a mobile phone and it looks nice on a big desktop.
Yeah, but if I haven't any responsive on my website,
then you're living in 1990, first of all. Well, it will. If it's not responsive, then it probably will look really ugly on a small device. If you want to have a good PWA, it should be responsive. If it's not, it still works, but it's not a good experience.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Who else?
Thank you for presentation. Actually, first of all, you were skipping this worker manually, then it was done automatically with full page reload. Is it possible to do it automatically in the background without interception, some user activity?
I'm not sure if it's possible, but I think it's a bad experience because you need to reload the page to get the new data anyway. You can activate it, but you want to see the new data. And you only see the new data if the page is refreshed, because then it has access to the caches again. So what will happen if you do it automatically, a user will go to your page, is reading something, and all of a sudden it's refreshing. So it's better to make sure the user knows what's going on and give them the power to say, oh, okay, update me, please.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, how many of the features that you just showed us here today will work even if you don't install the application to your homepage? All of them, some of them, notifications?
All of them.
Including notifications?
Including notification, because you have a service worker running in the background always. And the install is more, you can see install like, okay, put a shortcut on my screen. That's all what install essentially does in that case.
But how will, basically your script runs in Chrome, right? Or
no,
whatever mobile browser you're using.
It runs, it keeps on running in the background. So even if you close Chrome, the service worker is still there, is still active, listening for stuff.
And will that work with iOS too? Because iOS is also more strict, as they say.
Yes. I'm not sure how long ago, but I think a few weeks or a few months ago, iOS made sure that's working also. You're welcome.
Who else? Want to ask a question?
Hi, thanks.
Hi.
Adding an icon to the desktop, is it working on iOS for iPhones?
Yeah, also, yeah.
Oh, it's great.
Yes, it is.